The Avengers, Age of Ultron, Jurassic Park, The Lego Movie, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Star Wars, The Force Awakens, Batman vs. Superman. There's a big chance some of these film titles, if not all of them, ring a bell. These Hollywood films have captured audiences all over the world, and everybody has heard of them. It is not a coincidence that precisely these films are so broadly known. All of these films are part of franchises owned by transnational media conglomerates and based on the same marketing principle: the event movie strategy. The event movie strategy is a strategy used by transnational media conglomerates, of which film studios are a part, to ensure that their multi-billion-dollar investments into the creation of blockbuster films turn out a steady profit. In order to accomplish this goal, the films have to reach a broad audience in the theatrical market so that the films generate maximum profit and do so in the shortest time possible, so they can be sold on conglomerate-controlled ancillary markets. One way in which film producers try to ensure large audiences is to create films based on so-called pre-sold property, like the Batman vs. Superman movie, which was based on well-known comic book characters, or the Lord of the Rings trilogy, based on the famous epic by J.R.R. Tolkien. The idea behind this particular aspect of the event movie strategy is that audiences will be more easily drawn to the cinemas when they are already familiar with the story or the world in which it takes place. In other words, a film sells better when it is already present in the audience's consciousness. The preference to create films based on pre-sold property translates itself into the creation of numerous franchises containing film sequels and prequels.
Strangers from distant lands, friends of old, you've been summoned here to answer the threat of Mordor. Middle-earth stands upon the brink of destruction. None can escape it. You will unite or you will fall. Each race is bound to this fate, this one doom.
Bring forth the ring, Frodo.
The Lord of the Rings film trilogy is a prime example of the utilization of conglomerate production and distribution chains, along with their film rights, in order to create all sorts of products which can be turned into profit. There are all sorts of Lord of the Rings merchandise, like posters, jewelry, T-shirts, soundtracks and bedsheets. Successful films are also often the basis for other conglomerate-controlled media, like games or spin-off TV series. In the case of many event movies, profit is not made until products are sold on these ancillary markets. In order to ensure returns from these markets, conglomerates focus primarily on marketing. In order to improve marketing possibilities for an expensive film or franchise, it is usually based on a so-called high concept. In this high-concept marketing strategy, filmmakers shift the film's focus from complex character development and narratives to visual spectacle and easy-to-explain plots.
So film production is a very risky business because you're always running the risk that you're going to put something out there, invest a whole lot of money in it, and nobody's going to come see it, or you're not going to be able to market it or stuff like that. So high concept, it just means that there's that the film is driven by a very clear and simple idea that translates easily to marketing and advertising and promotional activity. So Jaws is one of the first really, really big high concept movies because the idea is very simple, right? There's a killer shark and it needs to be stopped. And you can create all kinds of, like half of that movie is just scenes building tension around, is the shark going to attack or not? And and does that really great. And then the second half is, okay, let's go kill that shark.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
And that's it. That's all there is to that film. That's something that is a lot easier to explain than a movie like Synecdoche, New York, where you can spend like 10 minutes going, okay, so there's this playwright, and he's got, and he has these weird ambitions, but he feels that art is kind of, both the meaning of life and also pointless, because however original he is, it's always going to be derivative of something else. So then he creates this art, and then you start going on in this monologue that lasts 10 minutes trying to explain this amazing movie that is so complicated that even after you spend 10 minutes talking about it, you still don't feel like you've even brushed the surface. So that's the opposite of high concept, right? High concept is a way to try to make films and market films that avoids a lot of the risk of filmmaking as a purely creative, experimental, or possibly experimental art form.
I need to feel free to party with a bunch of strangers whenever I feel like it.
What? Babe!
I will text you.
Where'd you get that sweet space cape, brother?
Cinema is not just a form of art, it is also a business, as has become evident by the choices in marketing that have come to the foreground so far. Filmmaking as a business, however, also means that all sorts of decisions have to be made, some of which might be at the cost of creative freedom of the people who create them. The drive to reach a massive audience, to link films in a franchise, or to base films on high concepts might seem logical from an economic perspective, but these choices have all sorts of repercussions on the creative side of filmmaking.
A good example of this kind of intricacy that goes into sort of the tension between creative ambition or directorial ideas versus the larger context of the franchise is Star Wars Rogue One, the new Star Wars prequel film that's going to be released in December.
State your name for the record.
Jyn Erso.
Forgery of imperial documents, possession of stolen property, aggravated assault, resisting arrest.
They were able to create a great trailer that hits all the right buttons of nostalgia and sort of and progressive thinking in a way. But they find in watching the film that it's not what the studio expected or wants. It's not what they call a 4-quadrant film. And a 4-quadrant film is a film that is able to reach all 4 key segments of the audience that they want to have. So basically a big blockbuster that will appeal, to young women, young men, older women, and older men. So you have all of the audience. It's not that. It's not funny enough. It's not light enough. It's sort of too intense and dark or something.
Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
So now they've brought in not one but 2 other directors who are helping to do reshoots, who are writing and directing extra scenes. So they're trying to fix the film that one director made because they have a clear sort of end product in mind that it needs to become. And this is, again, it's not new, but I think it's increasingly typical of the way these franchises are run.
Looks closely at Hollywood filmmaking, a clear trend can be seen in the sort of films that are created. By far, most blockbuster films are part of a larger franchise. This focus on franchise films has had a profound effect on the role and power of Hollywood directors.
Most filmmakers today, I think, would agree that the role of the director is declining rather than growing. So, for instance, Brian De Palma, one of the great film auteur figures of the 1960s and 1970s, he recently stated, well, I'm really not interested in making Hollywood films anymore because the creative freedom that I used to have as a director is now almost negligible because everything is about being part of a franchise and being regulated by producers and figures like in television that would be called the showrunner, people who are in charge of overseeing the franchise. So, for instance, the main creative figure behind the Marvel Cinematic Universe is not any of the directors that are in charge of any of the films. It's not Joss Whedon. It's not the writer-director of Jessica Jones. Those are creatives for hire. They come in, they perform a certain task, and then they're expected to leave.
The director of an event movie has less creative freedom than he would normally have with a lower budget film. There are more guidelines and limitations to what he can and cannot put in the film. In addition, the influence of the studio and the movie's position within a franchise or series further limits the director's freedom. The struggle for creative freedom becomes painfully apparent in the Marvel Cinematic Universe franchise, which is based on the Marvel comic books. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the MCU, has a vast overarching storyline spanning all current films. Marvel Studios has a very clear vision for the direction that the MCU has to take. This calls for the need to include references to the broader picture in every MCU release.
Joss Whedon, who felt very responsible for having contributed to the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe by writing and directing the Avengers film, had expected that he would be given more creative freedom on the second Avengers film because of the success of the first one. But he found that because the franchise had really grown so exponentially in the meantime, and its influence, impact, and power also became both culturally and economically, oversized. He was actually much more restricted in terms of what he was able to do, because everything had to fit within the larger contours of the story world, of which he was clearly not the author. He was clearly just simply the author of one of the sub-chapters within it.
According to Joss Whedon, directing the second Avengers film, Age of Ultron, broke him. The film that Whedon wanted to create did not fit within the overall story that Marvel wanted to tell. The studio forced Whedon to change the film. Scenes that would set up storylines for future films were included, while scenes that provided more background for certain characters in the present film had to be left out. All the problems Whedon encountered during production were so hard on him that he quit working for Marvel after production had finished. In another MCU-related case, the repercussions of the constraints imposed by Marvel Studios are even more severe. Before the Marvel Cinematic Universe launched with the 2008 release of Iron Man, Edgar Wright was working on a film based on a Marvel comic book character named Ant-Man. Whereas Wright first had all the creative freedom he desired, when Marvel Studios decided that Ant-Man was to become part of the MCU, that freedom was swiftly taken away. Marvel's so-called creative committee rewrote most of Wright's script. At that point, Wright had been working on the film for 8 years. For Wright, it must have been a terrible experience. As he saw his project slip away from him, he decided to quit.
I do think that film art as a whole would benefit from having more creative freedom and more space for experimentation. Film, like any other art form, is both a creative art form and a business. I think in the current climate, where the fear of piracy and of shifting business models and changing audiences, these are all elements that affect producers and production companies in ways that makes them afraid to take risks. Experimentation is becoming a lot rarer, especially because the scale of these franchises is so overwhelming. If you look at big cineplexes with 12 screens, and you want to go see a movie, and Star Wars The Force Awakens is playing on 4 of those screens, right? That just means that there's a lot less opportunity for filmmakers to actually create alternatives. It also means that for beginning filmmakers, right? For beginning filmmakers, they will often now make like a film that becomes a calling card, and then they get hired by one of the big franchises to do an installment of Star Wars or an installment of Star Trek or a Tolkien film or something like that, something that's a recognizable brand, and then you can have a career sort of moving from one franchise to the other. But it doesn't leave room for any kind of, auteurist development or creative self-sufficiency for filmmakers in the sense that we used to think of them. It becomes much more like working in Hollywood's golden age of studios, where directors were simply there to make sure that actors were standing in the right place and knew their lines and those kinds of things.
After the success of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, New Line Cinema was keen to also produce movies based on another story in the same universe, The Hobbit. While the Hobbit trilogy grossed almost $3 billion, it was widely regarded as inferior to The Lord of the Rings by numerous critics. Some say that this is because of the trilogy's excessive use of special effects, which might have to do with the fact that event movies are based on high-concept strategies where visual spectacle is a primary concern. Others believe the reason for this is that numerous characters have been added that were not present in the original Tolkien novel. Here it can be said that the film might be trying to capitalize on pre-sold property, since some of the characters have previously appeared in the Lord of the Rings films, or that it is trying to captivate a broader audience by also including an original strong female character. Another explanation is given in a feature on the third Hobbit film's DVD. Peter Jackson took over production after the original director, Guillermo del Toro, left because of delays in the production process. Jackson had his own vision and thus started the production from scratch. However, due to set release dates for the films, Jackson was unable to take the amount of time he thought he needed for the pre-production of the film. The result was that he had to make up a lot of things while filming.
When you're going onto a set, very complicated, and you're winging it. You've got nothing to go on, no storyboards, no previs. You've got these massively complicated scenes and you're just making it up there and then on the spot. If I was a director that hadn't had that 25 years of experience doing this in the past, it would have just been almost impossible. We would just tell the crew to take an extended lunch for an hour or so because I wanted to just get my head completely clear and be able to plot it through. I spent so much of The Hobbit feeling like I was not on top of it. With the fact that I hadn't much prep and I was making it up as I went along, and even from a script point of view, Philippa and Fran and I hadn't really got the entire scripts written all the way through to our satisfaction, so that was a very high pressure situation.
Whether the low appreciation of the Hobbit films was due to event movie related practices or due to an overconfident director remains to be seen. In general, it is clear that the event movie strategy has profound influence over the form that films take, and that it has certainly taken its toll on many a Hollywood director. Whether the strategy will continue to hold its firm grasp on the Hollywood film industry, only the future holds the answers, for even the very wise cannot see all ends.